Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I am an Episcopal priest and I live here in Austin, Texas. I've had the gift of recovery since December the 27th of 1972. Very grateful for that and for the many, many, many people who helped me all along the way. The purpose of these podcasts is to try to go a little bit deeper into the 12-step program. A number of years ago, I got real interested in the history, always interested in the spirituality and the psychology, but trying to put all of those things together in a way that can be helpful for people who want to go a little bit deeper and reap more of the benefits that I think recovery offers us. It's not just about not drinking or drugging or the food issues. It's who we are and why we're here and what it is we're being asked to do in this world. So that's the idea behind it. I encourage you, if you haven't done so, please visit our website. It's titled Two-Way Prayer, TWO, and sign up for the newsletter while you're there. Learn about the form of prayer that they did in the very early days of the Alcoholics Anonymous program coming out of the Oxford group, Two-Way Prayer. And I think you'll find it really fascinating. Totally changed my life. I got into that about 30 years ago and have never been the same. And my wife is very grateful for that. So there we go. We're starting a new series now. I've titled it Recovery Gems. And Gems is also the title of a book by my friend and guest, Andy C., who is coming to us from Victoria, Canada. Andy is in long-term recovery from alcohol addiction. He's also been a successful attorney in his life. He's sobered up way back in 1977 when he was in his third year of law school and has been active in 12-step recovery ever since. He's also been a leader in Canada's Lawyers Assistance Program, getting those drunken lawyers off the streets. That's a good thing. And he helped to found a place called Simon House. It's a nonprofit treatment center in Calgary, Canada. And all of the proceeds that Andy reaps, we use that term loosely, that he reaps from his book go to this charity. He's married to his wife, Doreen, and they have two grown children. Welcome to the podcast, Andy. I've been looking forward to doing this interview.
Well, thank you, Bill. And gosh, I've enjoyed your work over the years, and it's such a pleasure to be here. I should add a new appointment that I just received. I'm now a trustee on International Lawyers in AA, which is a really good organization. It's been around actually since 1977. So I'm now a trustee and slated to be chairman next year. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
Very good, very good. Well, you've stayed very active in the recovery movement, but you've been kind of on the edges of things a little bit. And that's, I want to kind of get into that in our discussions. See, I don't think the world needs more 12-step meetings. There's plenty of those. But I think the world does need people who can go deeper, approach recovery from a different angle, and provide things like that are so helpful to the many who could drop off. Not to discount the others, but that's what I've liked about your book. First, I thought it'd be good if you told us your story.
You've made such an important point there, Bill. We in Alcoholics Anonymous are so blessed. We are more than that, though. My experience in AA has led me to expand into call it AA adjacent. And that's where, I like that. That's where a lot of my growth has been. That's where a lot of my personal growth has been found, and where a lot of my modern or my more contemporary work is going. So it's a huge, huge point. Reading outside of Alcoholics Anonymous, approved literature is, I think, so important. And I look to the founders, and they did that all the time. Mm-hmm. One of the best meetings I've been to in a long time was over in Scotland. I formed this theory in AA: the further away you get from New York, the better things are. This was a small town in Scotland, and there in the literature table was the usual, big book, 12 and 12 and so on. But there was also copies of William James' Varieties of Religious Experiences, and copies of Henry Drummond's books.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, this is what AA used to be. It was, it was all about exploration and investigation. So
when I came in Detroit, I first came in 70 and then again in 72, but the literature table was divided in two parts with a ribbon running down the middle. And one side contained conference published literature, and the other was things like you're talking about to expand your mind and go deeper in the spirituality and the history. So I don't see that much anymore, but it's quite kosher for those of you who want to do it. It's allowable, and we have an attorney with us today to keep us out of trouble, I hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I go too far, Andy, you pull me back.
Yeah. No. If the AA police arrest you, give me a call.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that. Expect it. So, your story. How did a nice guy like you wind up with a bunch of drunks like us? And we're happy to have you.
Well, and I'm happy to be here. Yeah, my story is it's not unique. I'm not a lot of the speakers on the circuit, and I've spoken at rallies as well. They have these dramatic stories about feelings of inadequacy and tension, and that led them to drink. That's just not my story. My father was a very successful businessman, very clear division, mother at home, father at work, and he did well and she did well. The one unusual feature of my situation was my father's brother, my uncle Bill. He was an alcoholic. Now, I didn't know him when he was drinking. He'd sobered up, and he was in AA and a lion in AA. And my grandfather, my mother's father, had been a raving alcoholic in the small town that we lived in, Thunder Bay, Ontario. He helped bring AA to Thunder Bay with some of the other leaders of the community at the time. Sobered up, both of them sobered up, and did prodigious work within Alcoholics Anonymous. So within our family, AA was a good thing. It wasn't something to be feared or stigmatized. It was well regarded. So that I had a big advantage. My grandfather and uncle actually 12-stepped me. They didn't know it, but that's where it was going. But right from the beginning in my drinking, I had a problem. The first time I had a drink, I went right to the end. I got absolutely blackout drunk. So the allergic reaction to alcohol was immediate right off the get-go. No other problems, though. I had the usual teenage problems, but it was nothing unusual. As I say, a good family, good community. But I couldn't remember the last time I got drunk and the consequences that flowed with that with sufficient force not to do it again. I would find myself, yeah, this is a good idea. Have a drink, and then I'd be off and running. It otherwise normal. High school success and failure. I was in the drama and football, but I would binge. I would take off and not stop, and then I would do it again. I got one story. I got, like most of us, thousands of stories that tell the tale. The best story that encapsulates everything was a car accident. I was working for a brewery company up here in Canada, summer job, and my job was public relations. I'd set up for ball tournaments or outdoor activities with my sound system and so on. Met the salesman at the event, and we both agreed. I remember we sat down and said, as we were getting ready for the event, we should be very careful not to drink too much because we have a long drive back to the hotel. It was a really small community, little mining town, and we had about a 15, 20-mile drive back to the hotel. We said, we'll have to be stone sober when we go back. We both agreed on that. We both committed to that. We both violated that. He got drunk and I got drunk, and I packed up my gear, threw it all in the van, and drove off. It was a rainy, miserable, cold night in northern Ontario. and picked up a hitchhiker along the way. And thank God we had an argument, and I insisted he put on a seatbelt. A few miles later, single vehicle accident, just off the road. Van rolled over through the ditch and on. I exploded through my seatbelt, believe it or not. All of the load shifted, slammed into my seat, broke the seatbelt out, went through the windshield, and then they surmised that the van rolled on top of me as it careened down the ditch. 12:30 in the morning, pitch black, raining, isolated community. And there I was in a swampy ditch. My hitchhiker came to hanging upside down from his seatbelt. He unleashed himself, dropped down, and began searching for me. He flagged down some cars. They stopped. They would aim their headlights into the ditch, and they would look in that channel. And then they'd move the car down and look in that channel. They didn't know where I was. They finally found me. It took about an hour. I was airlifted to Winnipeg, Manitoba, and was in traction. I was in weighted traction for 6 months, 26 weeks to the day. But the traction didn't work. So it was 5 years of orthopedic surgery to put things back together. It was a wreck. I had skull fracture, collarbone, wrist, ribs were broken, collapsed lung, kidney damage. My hip was splayed open. My right femur had exploded out through. I ended up 3 inches shorter as a result because of the shortening of the legs because of the accident. That was a complete wreck. Now you might ask, okay, how drunk was he? Years later, a friend of mine asked me, he said, would you be interested in seeing a copy of the police report of your accident? I don't know why. Anyway, I said, sure, it'd be fun to see it. So I saw it. And it was the policeman had very good handwriting. I remember that. Very clear report on what he'd found and what was there. And then at the bottom, it said blood alcohol level 0.24. 3 times the Canadian legal limit, 0.24. And then a note right underneath that, no charges laid, not expected to live. Now that was 4 years before I came to AA. Well,
I had to get serious,
Yeah, it's amazing when I think about it. You read in the big book about people who have a major incident and it wakes them up and scares them. Well,
what did wake you up? What did wake you up?
Well, it was a funny. I think it's funny. I was in third year law school. By this time, the binge pattern was quite clear. I'd stop for months. I'd pick up again and I'd get drunk. And I realized no one else drinks like I do. I drink differently than everyone I know, both in summer jobs and in law school. I was succeeding. No question I was succeeding. Professors in law school, one in particular, every year he gave downtown Toronto firms the names of the students that he recommended that they'd make an offer to. Well, he'd given my name to 2 Toronto firms.
And to 3 bars in downtown Toronto too.
Well, somehow
it's a good customer here.
Well, I had this knack. He wasn't aware of that. I could hide it. I was treasurer of the Students' Law Society. I was on the finance committee of a major institution on campus. I mean, by many measures, I was succeeding, but I knew I drank differently.
And what was going on inside, Andy? What was
Nothing.
happening? No, come on. What was going on inside you?
Yeah, this is, it comes back to,
it was all success and looking good. Nothing inside.
That's substantially right.
Wow.
Bill writes about that in the big book. He says that otherwise normal, except for the drinking, and that's where I was. I was a very normal guy. I did not suffer from I had what I frame as the usual anxieties. I did feel apart from people, but I think everybody does to some extent. Life is lonely at its root. But the point is that everything was normal and I felt normal, but I had this allergic reaction to alcohol and this mental quirk of never remembering what happened the last time.
Okay.
But it was like a bulldozer plowing up. The incidents, the evidence kept mounting.
Yeah.
And I said, I drink differently. I've got a problem here. And I could look down the road and I could see a successful career ending up with an alcoholic disaster.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking one day, you're going to do well, but eventually it'll get frayed around the edges and it'll fall apart. And I thought, well, okay, I know the experts in drinking and stopping drinking are in AA. So I decided to try a meeting. And I went to my first meeting. It was in downtown Toronto. It was in a really high-end church, which I thought I was looking for because I'm a high-end guy. But I got there, and the high-end church was by this time in a low-end neighborhood, and it was a low-end meeting. 12, 15 people, all of them in varying degrees of street crisis, except for a couple who were running the meeting. By the time it got around to me, I'd figured out the pattern. You say your name and you're an alcoholic. So I said, my name's Andy. And I remember, and I said, I'm here. Later, an old timer came up to me and said, what's with this? I'm here. And I said, well, I'm in third year law school. I'm doing well. These other guys, they've got criminal charges that, I'm not like
I'm
them.
different. I'm different.
I'm different. I haven't hit the streets.
They were thinking the same thing, though.
Well, what I said was, I think I've got a drinking problem. I drink differently than everyone I know. And he saved my life because he said, well, let's look at these. And he pointed up to the pull down shade with all the steps on. He said, let's look at step one. Step one is in two parts. He said, clearly you don't think your life is unmanageable, but you may be powerless over alcohol and you only have to meet one of the two. He said, we have a test. And I thought, okay, I do well with tests. I like tests. He said, go out and have a couple of drinks and then stop abruptly.
That's what the book recommends. That's what the book recommends, isn't it?
Exactly.
He's a bookman.
So a big book guy. Stop abruptly and do that for several days. Now, if you can do that for several days, you won't have passed the test. You're not one of us. But if you find you're getting drunk every night, you'll pass the test and you can come back. I thought, whoa, that sounds easy. So I went out.
You did it.
Well, I passed the test. No question. I was qualified to come back. I went out the first night and I had a couple of drinks. And I remember thinking, oh, today's not a good day for a test.
Right.
and I got
weekends.
Drunk. Yeah. And so I went out a couple of days later and I had a couple of drinks. And I remember thinking, I kind of cheated the other night. So instead of 2 drinks, I'll make it a really hard test. I'll have 4 drinks and then I'll stop abruptly. Well, I didn't stop. The third night, which was the killer, took just enough money for a couple of drinks, stopped, had a great evening, came home. I thought, this is the way it should. This is how it should be. I felt good, got into my pajamas, got into bed, was reading in bed, thinking, it's just savoring the whole evening. Looked up, the clock had just passed midnight. And I thought, what would make this evening perfect as a nightcap? Got up, went across the room, got out of my 40-ounce bottle of gin out of the freezer, which was my favorite drink. Didn't pour myself a shot, poured myself a tumbler, got back into bed, got knee walking drunk, just obliterated. And I woke up the next morning and in a blinding moment of clarity, I thought, he said, take a couple of drinks, and if you find yourself getting drunk every night, you'll pass the test. You're one of us. I went back to a different meeting, but I went back to my second meeting. And now the first fellow saved my life with the test. The second fellow came up to me in the lineup for coffee and cake after the meeting, big speaker meeting in downtown Toronto. And he came up to me and said, you're new. And he said, my name's Doug. And I said, well, my name's Andy. And he said, here's my phone number. Give me yours. So I gave him my phone number. And he said the magic words. He said, we've met and we talked it over and we decided I'll be your temporary sponsor. Well, he hit all the psychological buttons. First of all, I'm important enough that they had a meeting about me, which was complete nonsense, but that I'd been assigned a temporary sponsor. And I tell in my talk, I'll say, he seemed like a nice guy, or he quickly disabused me of that opinion. But he was a great sponsor. He got me working through the steps. He kept me sober. And even today, I see a newcomer at a meeting and I go up and I say, here's my card, here's my name. Give me your name.
Mm-hmm.
Give me your name and your phone number, because I'm going to phone you tomorrow, and I'll phone you for a couple of days after, showing you how the phone works and how this communication works.
Those first impressions that we get in our initiation into recovery, they have a way of staying with us in profound ways.
Oh, yeah.
I think we look to our sponsors and they're almost godlike in their wisdom, and it's just amazing, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, I want to jump forward. I want to go forward, fast forward about 35, 40 years. You're active in recovery, and you start collecting some material for this book. The book is called Gems, and you begin to collect ideas, thoughts, experiences, and you speak about it in one of your little chapters about meditations. And it intrigued me because I was really happy to see that. You talk there about Eastern meditation, which is trying to think about nothing, you know, and the more successful you are in getting to nothing, the better you do. I have monkey mind. I was never very good at Eastern meditation techniques, and I found a lot of people in the program are not. And then I discovered, as you mentioned in one of your chapters, that there's another form of meditation, and it's more the Western form of meditation. It's thinking deeply about a subject, stewing in it, soaking in it, reflecting on it, allowing it to kind of take over my mind. And I sense that that's what these meditations are in your book, a collection of these kinds of things that have come to you over the years through meetings, through the literature, that have taken you deeper. Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, you are. I'd like to expand. You used the word ponder and stew, and those are true for some meditations. Another way of thinking about it, though, is plowing. Plowing a straight line. Meditation is taking a thought and working it through, dwelling on it, not in a brooding way, but in a straight way. That is another type of meditation that I have found to be very, very, very productive. And it's the discipline of choosing what to think about that's so important. Because then when I do that in my morning meditations, I'm getting practice for the rest of the day where I can choose what to think about and how to think. Because my default mentalities are not always good. To be able to choose what to think about. And the first insight that I had into this, if you call it, your use of the word Western is not inappropriate. But when rereading the big book one day, I realized Bill's idea of meditation it's deeply practical. Reflect on the day ahead.
Right.
I thought, whoa, that's how he framed one aspect of his meditation, which is, your work with the two-way prayer and the tradition of guidance coming from the Oxford group, I think is just absolutely important. It's significant because that's a lot of what my meditation today is. And in my legal career, I'd reflect on the day ahead and I'd look at my calendar and I think, well, I've got this phone call, this meeting, this will be easy, this will be difficult. I may have to let someone go, or they have to have a difficult call with a client. I would just get ready for these calls and meetings, just orient my mind in the proper way. Then I walk into the meetings, I walk into the calls, I walk into the situations so much better. It's just orders of magnitude better.
So you're utilizing imagination
there is
part.
that, yes.
Yeah, which is fine.
Yeah.
It's been given to us for a reason. We would always imagine the terrible things that are going to happen. People
Right.
have no difficulty with that,
No.
I'm going to sit here and imagine what's going to go wrong today.
Yeah, that's right. But with practice, and that one of the best meditation shares I've ever heard was at a AA meeting down in Alabama, and a good old boy in the back, gray-haired, well-dressed, but that he had that beautiful Alabama Southern accent, and he said, "My name's Bo." I didn't know people were named Bo.
We got a lot of Bo's down here.
Yeah, my name is Bo, and I'm an alcoholic. And he said the topic for the meeting is meditation, step 11. He said, I have something to say about that. And a long pause. And he said, meditation is all about discipline and has nothing to do with technique. Thanks. And that's so true. You run into people at the meetings and they say, well, I can't meditate. I don't do it well. And I just think to myself, you haven't done it enough. It's not, you can't do it well. I mean, it's not complicated. So I get my guys to start at the beginning. It's just stop, set a kitchen timer for 10 minutes, sit down, and that timer, because that's what my sponsor did with me. Remember the old egg timers, and wind them up, set it for 10 minutes. And sit and think about the day ahead. Just do that. And that's where I get into the idea. You don't stew on it, but think about it. Think about the meetings and the calls. Get ready for the day ahead. And that gets them oriented in the right direction.
In Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, there's a description of how Dr. Bob himself did his morning quiet time. And that's exactly what he talks about.
Yeah.
The quotation that is in there, that he looks at the day ahead. What is God asking of me this day? Then, not what do you say in step 11? Knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. That's what we should be doing there.
Yeah. And
Beautiful.
that's why your work is on two-way prayer. When I stumbled on it, I thought, oh, this is. I immediately thought of you as St. Bill.
Well, don't stop now, Andy.
Share the message. But it's just so important and so useful and so powerful. And all of the guys, since discovering your website, I pointed more and more people towards it. And then your written materials. I mean, it's so you've done such a brilliant job of reframing and updating our meditation and habits, living habits in the program. You talked about Dr. Bob, Frank Amos. You remember the story,
Rockefeller's guy
sent Amos out to New York and Akron to figure out what's going on. And Amos, in his memo back, summarized Dr. Bob's 12-step process. And Dr. Bob, according to Amos, had realized that if I don't figure out a more efficient way to triage these newcomers, I'm spending 4 to 6 hours each with them, and a lot of them are saying it's not for me. So he figured out what I've come to call the 5+2, and there was 5 non-negotiables. And Amos writes about this. Dr. Bob had 5 things. If the newcomer did not agree with them, Dr. Bob would say, "You don't want what I have. I wish you well." And then he had 2 optionals. The non-negotiables were you had to have a conversion experience. You had to admit you were an alcoholic and could never drink again. You had to make amends. You had to promise to make amends for the wrongs you've done and stop sinning, stop making the amends. and you had to promise to carry the message to other suffering alcoholics. The fifth non-negotiable was you had to commit to a daily prayer and meditation practice. Now, the two optionals, it would be nice if you went to AA meetings, and it would be nice if you went back to your church. Then one of the non-negotiables was prayer and meditation.
Right.
One of the optionals was go to meetings. So Dr. Bob, if he heard somebody say 90 meetings in 90 days, he'd say, well, okay, but 90 prayer and meditation periods in 90 days may be more important. So your work, I think, has recaptured that sense of Akron AA, Dr. Bob's AA.
Yeah, and I remember when I first read that quotation from the Frank Amos report, and it was like, well, this is not what I was taught. It was exactly the opposite. Meetings, meetings, meetings.
Meetings, yeah.
You know, and some parts of the country where I go, that's the strict emphasis is on the meetings. In some parts of the country, even the focus on the 12 steps is minimal, let alone the prayer and meditation.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of work to do in kind of going back to the original, seeing what it was that they were emphasizing, and that opened the door to me to prayer and meditation, because I was read your 24-hour book, have your cup of coffee. It was quite minimal, and this was a very different deal. So I started doing it 30 plus years ago, and it totally changed my life.
And this segues into these books, gems and more gems and still more gems, because
you must be an alcoholic to keep doing the gems thing. You know, it's if one gem is good, three's got to be better.
But
you passed the test once again.
The OCD test as well as the alcoholic test. Going to meetings, I developed a habit, and it's maybe from I was a lawyer, as you mentioned, and I was not a litigation lawyer. I didn't stand up and present in courtrooms. I was a corporate lawyer. I helped clients with their business arrangements and taking companies public and working through tax issues. It was detailed, a lot of meetings, a lot of detailed work. And I kept notes. In a meeting, I would just be jotting notes and thoughts. And I'd realized early in my career that people would say things, well, they'd be a long paragraph, but by the time they got to the end of the paragraph, I forgot the beginning of the paragraph and the point that I wanted to make. So I got into the habit of taking notes. And it seemed quite natural and appropriate to me to continue that habit in meetings. So I had a little notepad. Now, this is the one I use today, but it was in the early days, it was a little spiral thing, all about this side, just sitting on the table with a pen. And I'd hear things. I think, I want to remember that. And I just jot down a short form, just an aide memoir. And then I would, the next morning, or even later that night, but usually the next morning over breakfast, I'd take up my notepad from the night before. And over breakfast, I just look at what was said. And I think, boy, that was really good. That was just great. And I'd meditate on it. It was looking back on it, that's what I was doing, but I didn't think of it at that time. I would just think, boy, that was a really good insight. Got to remember that. I'd take the note and I'd throw it away. I didn't keep them, but I kept them for at least for a day. And it was a habit that I started. And then one night, my sponsor in Calgary said, what do you always take these notes. What do you do with them? I told him what I do with them. And he said, you should write up those thoughts and share them. And this was in the early days. The emails were just starting. He said, share them. Just, you got lots of sponsees at this time. Share them with your sponsees and me. I'd be interested as well. So I started just a little email chain and taking the notes and thinking about them, and then sending out a note. And then another, actually a sponsee said, there's this thing called blogging. You could start a blog with these notes. So I started blogging, which I'm still doing and enjoying it. And then the same sponsee who was in marketing and communications said, you know, that you probably have enough of these blogs to actually generate a book. And so one thing led to another. And so these gems are things that I've heard, sometimes at meetings, sometimes in meetings with a sponsee or a sponsor, that I've just captured in my notes and thought on and expanded. And so they're, in a sense, meditations.
Yeah.
They're, in a sense, reflections.
Right.
And that's where they started.
Nice. So let's jump into the first collection, and it kind of centers around old timers versus long timers.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's talk about that.
yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
trap. It's a real trap, and
it is.
yeah, let's help people through that one. What'd you learn?
Yeah, what I've observed over my decades in the program is that there are two, broadly speaking, two types of AA members. There are long timers. They've got long, you know, some of them have decades of time in the program. And then there are old timers. The long timers have stalled. They've experienced spiritual growth and then stopped. Now, a lot of us, we can see a lot of them at the early days. They stop right after they sober up. That's as far as they get. They get sober and then they just move through. And they're the 90 meetings, and you know, they're looking at the fellowship, they're looking at the meetings. But you say, well, how's your spiritual? You know, my favorite question what step are you thinking about? And they don't know. They don't have an answer. They're sober and they're just cruising. They're stalled there. Others, I noticed, can get, say, 3 years sober, but they stall there. They got 3 years, they're now comfortable, the job's going well, they're at home, life is better, they're back in the big bed, you know, life is good. So they can just cruise at 3 years. And then they start repeating, the early guys just repeat the 1 year experience over and over and over. The 3 year guys repeat the 3 year experience over and over. And even 5 and 10 years, I noticed that, you know, I hear somebody talking or I listen to them or I meet with them and I think, you know, your spiritual development and your growth in the program, you're where you were 5 years ago when you got your 10-year chip. And you're just repeating that first decade.
My sponsor had a phrase for that I liked. He said, Bill, watch out. You're going to meet many people in the program who have experienced a limited conversion.
Right. Yeah, I've heard you talk about that.
It's like, yeah, that's exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly.
They go so far and then they repeat it over and over, and the forward motion has stopped.
And it's deceptive because the motion hasn't. I often think of a plateau like you're in Texas. You know, you've got mesas in Arizona and Texas, and I think, okay, they climb up to a mesa and then they just wander around, and it feels like they're moving, but they're just wandering around on the level. They're not climbing anymore.
Yeah.
And
I would point out that they includes we.
Oh yeah.
Don't lose sight of that one.
No.
Or I need to not lose sight that this is the human condition that we will do this.
And to your point, it was my condition. I mean, I saw this, but in looking at my, you know, for the first years of my program, it was all about the fellowship. But that was it.
Yeah.
It wasn't until there was a couple of turning points where I started using the steps and then starting applying the steps in all my affairs. There was major turning points in my sobriety.
Mm-hmm.
But between the turning points,
often painful ones, I suspect.
Oh, well, that was so that brings us to the old timers. The old timers have experienced spiritual growth, often as a result of a crisis.
Yeah,
that they'll be cruising along and the crisis erupts, and they get the gift of another gift of desperation that stimulates them into a new, higher level of spiritual development.
Right.
So
it does not look like a gift when it arrives.
No, it sure doesn't. No, you're just it's the furthest thing.
Oh my God! Yeah. Oh, crisis.
Yeah, but you know, my experience and then the experience that I've observed is that eventually we hit a point where we don't need the crisis.
Mm-hmm.
That's a magical point. It doesn't happen for me. It didn't happen. Oh, I discovered that and that was it. I did it once, but then further spiritual growth required additional crises.
Right.
But then I
Right.
did it again, and setting up regular routines for me has been so important. And often tell my sponsors, if you want what I have, you have to be a bit obsessive. So the distinction between long timers and old timers, I think, is it's very, very important. And I look for it. I watch for it too. You and I have been around long enough to identify the distinction between the long timers and old timers. And it's important to keep in touch with the guys, even who are long in the program, but have lost it. One of the best sponsors, a great sponsee that I've worked with for a long time, showed up at our Monday night meeting one night. He was new. I'd never seen him before. And I walked across and introduced myself. And I said, "Are you new to the program?" He said, No, I've been sober for a long time, but I lost touch with the meeting. And then I said to him, "So what step are you working on?" And he said, "No, I did the steps a long time ago." I said, "Oh, you're on step 1." And he laughed. And that started the beginning of a beautiful relationship.
That one never goes away.
No,
Or if it does, prepare for a crisis, either mini or major,
that's right.
because that's
Right.
what has to be hung on to.
Yeah.
Particularly what I was told, again, by that brilliant man who sponsored me and spent 11 years on Skid Row learning this stuff.
Yeah.
What he said is, you can get 100% of the first part of step 1,
Yeah.
that you're powerless over alcohol. You can get that 100%. The depth of your unmanageable life is an ongoing mystery that will be revealed to you over time. You'll never grasp it fully. And I have found that to be exactly right, that it's my ego coming up against life and inflating and thinking it can manage, thinking it can take on godlike qualities and that sort of thing. And I need another lesson. Like you say, it doesn't have to go to crisis level, but if I'm not watching myself closely, watching it inflate, you have to catch it early. And you can catch it early, but it has to be caught or it'll catch you.
And in my experience, the best way to catch it is through the discipline of inventories.
Daily, and
daily,
moment to moment too.
Yeah, there's the daily and moment. The big ones for me are my annual inventories. Bill Wilson writes, businesses that don't do regular inventories usually go broke. Well, as a lawyer, and my wife and I were also venture capital investors, we know the importance of inventories in business. It's absolutely critical.
Right.
And in a business, there's an annual inventory cycle. Every year you do a major detailed line by line, item by item inventory, and that's reported to the auditors, and the auditors do a full report and they report to the share. It's a big event. Quarterly, the board of directors, they want to see an inventory report. And monthly, the president needs to see an inventory report. And then the store manager or the area manager on a weekly basis has to see their inventory. If you don't pay attention to your inventories, you're finished. You'll be bankrupt. We've talked about in the rooms that I go to, that we talk more and more about the daily and the spot inventories. People, in my view, miss the big one, which is the annual inventory. And for me, I started doing them decades ago. Every year on my AA birthday, I start another one. It's a full-blown comprehensive inventory. And that's where I discover the character defects that have been manifest. I have discovered others during the year, no question about it, the weeklies and the monthlies and the quarterlies. But the annual ones, they're the big ones. That's the big, that for me, it's huge. Absolutely huge.
I want to start going through the quests, some of the meditations. We can hit those and just kind of respond relatively quickly, if you could.
Sure.
I know you guys often get paid by the hour, billable hours, but that doesn't count in AA. So here we go. Asking the right or the wrong questions is one. What would you say about that? The necessity to do that?
For a long time, I asked, even after I was sober, I asked, so why am I an alcoholic? Why am I not a spiritual guru? Why isn't this happening?
Why?
Why? And then I realized, wait, the question, that's just the wrong question. So I'm not likely to get the right answer.
Yeah.
And so I started asking how do I become more emotionally sober? How can I help other alcoholics? How can I help how can I help life in general? I stopped asking the why of and within that transformation is acceptance, which actually I was listening to your podcast on just yesterday, your latest podcast. You dwelt at length on acceptance and Dr. Paul's story in the big book about the importance of acceptance. Within acceptance is this asking, okay, I'm here, that's fine. How do I move forward next? I stopped asking the whys and I started asking the whats and the hows.
Right. That's very important. I can't remember who said it, but it was some guy. The guy was in therapy for 10 years. Why me? Why me? Why me?
Yeah.
$150 an hour.
Yeah.
And after 10 years, he got, why not me?
Yeah. No, that was in your podcast yesterday too.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah. I remember a New Yorker cartoon with that, the famous New Yorker drawings. And there was the doctor sitting at his desk and the patient across the way, and the doctor saying, well, I prefer to, look at it. Why not you?
Why not you? That's right. That's right. So now the question becomes, what do I do with this? What do I do with my, I used to sit in the bars, what is the meaning of life? The theology, a theology teacher and myself would sit there till 2:00 in the morning discussing things like, what's the meaning of life? Which I think Frankl, you'll never get that.
No.
You have to ask the right question. What is the meaning of my life?
Yeah.
Which is totally different.
Which is it's a how and a what question.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing that I learned, as I say, I'm a bit obsessive and I measure things. And one day I thought I should measure my spiritual connectivity during the day. So I determined for a couple of weeks, I would morning, mid-morning, noon, mid-afternoon, and evening, rate myself just a quick 1 to 10 scale on my spiritual connectivity. And because I wanted to see if it fluctuated during the day, because I thought it did. And then I learned a huge lesson, which many economists have learned before. What you measure, you're going to pay attention to. Mm-hmm. Simply asking the question, how connected am I, led to a deeper connection. Okay, what's the score? Well, it's a 3 of 10. Well, that's not very good. But then I'd say, but now I'm connected. So asking the right questions, how much and what, rather than why. I could have said, why am I not connected? But that's so it's like the engineer in the Titanic. You may have heard that story. He said the Titanic is sinking in the North Atlantic, and he says, well, I'm not going to leave until I figure out why. and he was last seen standing on the fantail of the Titanic as it was going down. I've got the answer. I figured out why. Come back and get me. Well, it was too late.
Friend said you get the booby prize for that.
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
You get the booby prize.
Yeah, yeah.
You miss life.
You do.
He did. Yeah. Anger and rage. You have a little blurb on that. Anger and rage. It's a huge problem for people. Again, if you're looking at long term rather than quality, you're going to miss it, and it's going to overwhelm you. On occasion. I liked what Jung says. I don't have rage. Rage has me. Mm-hmm. And it's these unconscious things that kind of reach up from within and grab us and pull us down if we're not watching them. very closely.
In my experience, even if I'm watching it, your
It
phrasing
can still, yeah.
I think is exactly right. We don't grab it, it grabs us.
Right. And if you got long term, you can say, well, I shouldn't have this.
Yeah,
Well, yes,
yeah.
you should. You're a human being. Well, you're going to have all of these things.
That's right. That's right. It's exactly right. Don't then use that as an excuse to cut yourself some slack.
No.
But before I came into the program, my word for the year a couple of years ago was a brilliant word, very big word, and the viewers may love it. It was omphaloskepsis. Omphaloskepsis. It's a Greek word, OMPH, omphaloskepsis, and it means self-absorbed navel gazing. And that was how I looked at myself before I sobered up. When I came into the program and discovered inventories and the disciplined process of writing and answering questions, that was a breakthrough for me. I was no longer omphaloskeptic, I was investigating. And to rage, which was a huge problem for me, anger and rage were some of my biggest problems.
Okay.
And it was through that process of inventory and study in a disciplined way that I became to see why. And rage is always, they seem like lightning strikes, just boom, bang, and I out of nowhere and out of control, and I'd be in rage. So I started looking at them, and I lightning strikes are a great metaphor, and I talk about this in one of the meditations. The lightning strike happens in the village and strikes the church spire, but it started hours before, way far away in a field. Over a field, a cloud built up, a thunderhead started to build, and all the electrons in the cloud are banging together and making more and more power and building up electricity. And then the wind blows the cloud gently over the village. By the time it's over the village, it's now a thunderhead. And there's this massive electrical charge. And the electrical charge does what it wants to do. It looks for the highest point, which happens to be the steeple in the village. Bang, there it is. So what appears to be an out of nowhere experience actually has a process that you can see and understand. So during the day, when I'm at the office, the little conflicts and electrons are banging against each other, and that's the cloud over the field. But then it drifts home. I drive home, and it looks for the highest thing in the land to hit, and there's my wife. She says something, it's a little untoward, bang, the lightning hits, and I'm enraged. So now, as I say to my sponsees, I tell them that story. I say, now let's look at your day. let's look at where the clouds started to build up, because it appears to be a random phenomena, but it's actually a very natural process.
And I've lost connection. I've lost the connection. You talked earlier about how do I lose it, during the day.
Yeah.
I may have it firmly solid connection in the morning when I've done my meditation. I have a friend, he said, and then I leak. I leak as I go through the day, and I don't need God anymore.
Yeah.
Now I'm running the show.
Yeah.
And once I'm doing that, once I'm in charge, it's free reign for the stuff that's in me to come out, because I'm not keeping an eye on it. When you said I'm full of skepsis, I thought you were saying I'm full of shit.
No.
Well, that's not a bad one either.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's the proper Greek, but it's certainly the proper Gaelic. So,
but it's so iterative, because when you think about that, it's no different from our drinking. You see the newcomer in, and he comes in, he's just off a bender, 9 o'clock in the morning. I'll never drink again. I never want to drink. By
sincere when he says that. Absolutely sincere.
By 10:30, well, it was a rough night, but maybe I can handle it. By noon, he's got an itch that needs to be scratched. And by 3 o'clock, he's saying, oh, what the hell, I can do it again. So that pattern repeats again and again and again.
It does. Okay. Final thoughts on old timers versus long timers. Words of wisdom.
Well, yeah, that's
to us.
there's different types of old timers. I talk about that in the book. There's drifters. They're just drifting around, bored. They've confused boredom and serenity.
Right.
Complacency. When Bill wrote the big book, he said resentment's the number one problem, number one offender. I think he would still say resentment is the number one offender, but he'd add in complacency as the number one problem.
Mm-hmm.
And pride. Oh, I just that is it, and I know that to be true. It's one of the great risks of spiritual growth, and giving advice to people whether they want it or not. And then there's the worst are the cranky old timers. They're just exhausted. They've been, you talked about that. We talked about that earlier, putting on the game face. Everything's okay. I've got 15 years. It must be okay.
Yeah.
And
can I call the family and check that out with them?
Yeah.
let's see what they report.
Yeah. Isn't that the
what's
truth?
he like to live with?
Yeah. I was working with a sponsor years ago, and he came back with his fourth step, and it had 6 names on it. I said, "That's it?" And he said, "Yeah, no, I'd get along with everybody." I said, "Oh, okay. Let's for our next session, let's bring your wife into this."
Oh.
And he said, "I hope you're joking." And I said, "Well, I was, but I'm starting to warm up to the idea."
Right. Well, when I was doing counseling, Family Week, patient would be in there for 2 or 3 weeks singing this kind of a song. And then the family members would show up, and the guys and the gals in the group would say, "Hey, Charlie, that's a very different story than you were telling us," So, absolutely. Well, listen, this has been really fun, and I'm looking forward to going deeper in the series. The next chapter I think we're going to tackle is serenity and growth. I'm going to invite everybody to come back for that. The 12 steps. The potential for spiritual growth and emotional growth is almost infinite. And we need to avail ourselves of that and become the people that we are intended to be. That's what Jung was all about. I think that's what Jesus was all about. I think, but that's what you're all about. It's for each one of ourselves, not to become that person, but to become the self that we are capable of becoming.
I have a personal mission statement, like Stephen Covey writes about. And my personal mission statement for a long time now is to become the Andy that God desires.
There you go.
Well, what a great session. This has been absolutely fun, Bill.
Well, great. Thank you for doing it. I really appreciate it. I look forward to more. We're going to put Andy's book in the show notes. You can access it there. You can also get in touch with Andy. I will put. He's got a website deal that you can drop him a line and let him know what's going on in your life. He's a great guy to talk to. So listen, thank you, Andy, once again. Look forward to next week. Thank you guys for listening. Hope it was helpful. If you're an old timer, get back in the saddle. God's got more for you to do.
If you're a long timer.
Long timer. Okay. Long timer. Old timer. What the hell? Give it up.
Spread the news.
Thank you guys. God bless. Keep coming back.